Welcome to the group chat. I'm Anthony Holt. Today we have Adrien Shropshire, Executive Director of BlackPAC and founder of Hummingbird Productions, and Zaire Calvin, Altadena resident and an advocate who has been on the ground every day fighting for the rebuild of Altadena. Thanks everyone for coming on today. Today's a special episode. We're talking about the release of a documentary that we shot, Rebuilding Altadena. It's past a year since the anniversary of the fires, and coming up on a year since we started filming. So, thanks you guys for coming on, and Zaire, thank you for coming on. I just want to kind of talk to you. What does it mean, and why is it important for this film and films like this to come out to shed light on the story?
It's important to shed light on the story because it's been a year and it's already fading in response and understanding all of the difficulties that the community is going through. So, with time passes, people forget and people think that, all of the resources and everything that's been needed for that community has been taken care of, not understanding that they're just now facing the uphill battle of rebuild and cost and everything that is equitable about being back for our community. So it's the importance of it now is the go time. It's go time now. Like, this is the time that we can make history and make a difference as a people and as a community and change with something that's never happened before. So in other words, with these tragedies and our tragedy in our community for Altadena, losing everything and having that come back has never happened in any community when it's come to a wildfire or anything, even the ones in California. No one's actually recovered. And we don't talk about that enough in recovery. If we go back down to even New Orleans and everything that happened there with the flood, they never recovered. And we just kind of pushed past that. And I think that's why this is such a big deal for us as a community, historically Black community that was redlined, to be in recovery and to show as a community how we can help our community recover in real time.
And Zaire, it feels like it's so important to be talking about this story. I think, to your point, that we need to continue to talk about what's happening and continue to shine light on it, because when the fires broke out more than a year ago now, Altadena wasn't in the news, right? We were talking about the wildfires in Los Angeles, but we weren't initially. No one even paid attention to the fact that Altadena was burning to the ground. And then there was some attention, and then it faded. And then the 1-year anniversary happened and cameras came back, and now we're like a month, maybe almost a month and a half away from the anniversary. And again, there's no conversation. So talk a little bit about what that kind of roller coaster has been like, to have attention, to not have attention, and then for folks like us to come along and be like, hey, let's put this on film so that people know, and then you having to relive all that stuff all over again. Talk about what that's been like, the kind of up and down emotional roller coaster, I'd imagine.
It's been an emotional roller coaster since the beginning. So to realize that if I wasn't the voice being used as a vessel to even point out Black Altadena and to give the story of Black Altadena and redlining, that wouldn't be a conversation. If media would have never covered the few stories that we were able to cover, we wouldn't even been pointed out as a community or a Black community, or to even have that understanding. So exactly to your point, it's so important. It's beyond important, because once I saw that is what was happening and we weren't getting the coverage or the care to care about our community. Now, fast forward, when people think that reliving this over and over again, meaning the tragedy of everything that this story has been. Like, the reason I became the poster child, of course, is because of God, but it is because of the tragedy that happened. I was the first death reported in all of the fires. I was the first lawsuit. Me losing my sister and having to find her, literally find her. that experience, no one to have to keep reliving that over and over again, and then the pain of that, and then processing that through advocating for all of the other ones who lost lives, the other 19 people who lost 19 families that lost people also, which are people I know. The difference is when you're talking about, the Swain family who I coach with, he lost his sister on my same street. You're talking about people that are in a radius of a block away, like Anthony Kelly, whose mom passed. So all of these stories that's what ignited me to want to fight for my whole community. Because when you know thousands, you know the whole community. You're connected to the whole community. I mean, and I do mean white, black, Jewish, Asian, Hispanic, the whole entire community. And it's a black community, and you're fighting for this community. It was just so important to have media or the story be told early on, but it hasn't been told enough. And the point of this doc and why it's so important is so we can get resources to actually recover. It's been painful uh, having to relive this over and over again for the community. So we're not seen, so we don't go away, so it doesn't disappear, so the story doesn't disappear. So the importance of this has been, it takes an emotional toll. It's a roller coaster because you're fighting every part of the fight. I've gotten legislation passed. AB 851, which was against predatory uh, practices and all that type of stuff. So when you're fighting on all forms, and I got other legislation passed that brought funds into the community, to make sure that we had a fighting chance. And it's just been hard. Developed the biggest thing, which is our Altadena Native Rebuild Plan, which is a plan that aligned government officials, meaning all of our senators, with our local county people and the local community. When you're fighting all these different fights to make sure we're seen and we have the resources to come back, we need something like this to continue for this to even happen.
Now, Zaire, when we filmed, we took some walks down the neighborhood, and you was just showing me, for years when you grew up, this house, this neighbor, and you had a story for just about everybody on that block. Do you have a fear that may never come back, and that may never come back for the community in whole?
100%. I have a fear of gentrification. I have a fear of disaster capitalism when it comes to development and people coming in and taking advantage of people and buying up the land. It's a huge fear, especially when you're ripping away the roots and the legacy of generations of people who traditionally, as black people, we don't have, you know big 401ks or stock options and all those different things. And a lot of the wealth in black communities has been passed down generationally through property and holding on to property, and us not having property, which is why there's a wealth disparity, when it comes to black people, is because of ownership. And, per capita, we were the biggest ownership in the United States of America, in Altadena, in this small place, to show land ownership. And our elders, these are a lot of my elders who bought, you know, homes back in the 40s, 50s, 30s, 60s. You're talking about people who've been here and created and put a platform for this generational wealth. So me growing up, born and raised in Altadena, lived there my entire life. Only went away to college, went to a HBCU, Alabama State. I have to give a shout out. It gave me a good foundation. But going through all of these different, living in this community my entire life, I'm tied to every part of those roots. because I've been there my entire life. So every neighbor I know who left the neighborhood. I can go house by house all the way down the street. I could tell the new neighbors who they are. When they used to come on the block, it'd be the opposite. It'd be like, oh, so you're new to the community. And then people who are blocks away would be like, no, I've been here for 5 or 10 years. I'm like, yeah, so you're new to the community. And then they understand that they're in a different community that we've been, lived in our whole lives, and set the culture and the communication of what that community has been. So, yeah, I grew up on the same block, and then bought a home when I got out of college on the same block next door to my mother so I could be close to family in that same neighborhood. So coming back from college, that was my first thing. It was a beautiful lot that I've always wanted because it was hidden. It was an L-shaped lot that you didn't realize how huge it was. And that was my dream. And that story, as I have told, is, I call them my white uncles, the Repettis. They owned it. And I told them when I got older I wanted to buy it. And they were like, Z, we got you. When you get older, we'll see what you're doing. And when I became grown, I used to work with them actually as they had a bail bondsman thing. So I've been a bail bondsman. So I worked for Repetti Bail Bonds and was a bail bondsman, and used to run around chasing people, when they didn't pay their bail and all that type of stuff. So bounty hunter, as they call it. So I was even in that life because of them. But they sold me my first home, and it was a blessing. And my mother helped me get that home, and that's how long I've been there. And from there, I remodeled my home brand new. So right before the fires, my family and I, wife and I, had remodeled the house brand new. So everything was absolutely new.
And when you speak on that, that was the generational wealth that your mom was able to get in her home enabled you to purchase your home, correct?
100%. If my mother didn't have, the value in her home, I wouldn't have been able to pull value to make sure I could do the remodel for my home. So that's the generational wealth. We talk about how, I wouldn't have been able to remodel. I wouldn't have never had the funds to be able to do that. So again, because of generational wealth and because my mother, you know, put so much, and her house was paid off. So you talking about, and that's the other thing that people don't realize, that a lot of these homes are paid off. So when it came to insurance or people not having insurance, and a lot of times it was a lack because it was paid off. And because you weren't worried about it because you owned it and you didn't owe anything on the house. So a lot of times, you know, that was the case. And a lot of my elders that I've talked about, and they're embarrassed to say, they didn't trust banks still. You're talking about an older generation. So you're talking about people who had money stashed in the walls, which my mother being one of them. So a lot of that stuff, when you're talking about people who kept their money, as they call it, in between the mattress, in safes, in places like that, there's when they're like, oh, these people are irresponsible. No, people, a lot of families that I talked to had cash. Like, well, I saved up all my money for most of my life, so I was always putting away in this pot, putting away in this pot. So there's families who won't admit it because they're embarrassed. They'll admit it to me, or they'll talk about bring it out, but they're hurt because then they get ridiculed. Like, why would you have that in your house and not in the bank, or why would you have that amount of money? $500,000, access. And a lot of them will tell you, well, because when the market crashed and those banks were making runs on people's money, in their younger generation that happened. And then again, when we had the new market crash, when banks, and they froze banks, people got scared. So the older generation still moved from that type of from that mind state of protection. So they would hide money and put money up physically, so they had it, so they weren't worried about the insurance on that type, and they don't talk about that enough. So it was a lot of actual money lost in the community that was cash, because 60% of the homeowners were elders, were over 60, and were over 70, in their 80s and 90s. So that is how they're pen and paper people. So they're basic. They put a quarter of their money in the bank, and the rest they have access to, where they could always do whatever they needed to do whenever they wanted to. So we don't talk about a lot of those stories. So
Well,
that's why that's important.
I mean that's a really thank you for lifting that up, because people do think about the loss of folks' homes. I don't know any Black people who don't keep cash in their house. It's just not a thing. And so like that little detail about you lost your house, but then you lost all this liquid cash that you had access to. I think that that's something that I certainly haven't heard about, but makes sense to me that that would be another loss on top of the loss. You talked about how folks had their homes paid off, and so that was your mother, but it was so many of the families. When people talk about generational wealth, or the way that families in Altadena, I mean, I think this is a thing that's quite unique to Altadena, was the generational nature, right, of the community, of the nature. People are there 3-4 generations, and just as you described, helping each other buy homes in the neighborhood. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about, and so where are people now? Like, what are the challenges that folks are facing in this moment? They're able to do the demolition on the lot, but what are folks facing right now, and what are the challenges to rebuilding?
So there's so many challenges to rebuilding, and that's what I'm learning, that this is disaster capitalism, and you're taking advantage of so many different people. So the first thing is the insurance companies, frontline fighting against the insurance companies to get them to do the payouts, and they're not doing the payouts, and that's been a huge problem. So when people are facing homelessness and you can't get a payout to wherever you're staying, then that's a big problem. Because think about it, your house just burnt down, so you're still paying your mortgage. People keep forgetting that you're paying your mortgage. Then you have to go get a place to live, which everything's inflated because of the fire. So then all the predatory stuff start happening at that. So all the landlords start raising their rents because they knew people were homeless and they needed a place to stay, and they know they could get top money for all the rents now. So rents tripled. So now you're paying a mortgage and a rent that's higher than your mortgage if you had a mortgage. On top of, you're trying to take care of yourself, and then your family's displaced. So then you're fighting all those different things at the same time. So now your family's not all in one place a lot of times because of a job or because you have to live further away. So then now trying to get back and rebuild, that starts the flow. Um, the second part of that becomes construction and the predatory side of construction. So now you have all of the people who are coming in, the developers who want to, you know, give you a loan. Think about this. After all the things I just said, on top of that, to solve your problem, it's like, oh, we'll give you this loan at this percent. So now you're creating more debt on top of the debt that you already have, and you don't know if you have enough money because the insurance companies grossly underinsured the whole community. So this is why this ties all the way back into the insurance problem, is everybody is grossly uninsured. So then now, not everyone, the majority of, I'll say 85%, 15%, they have great insurance, no problem. 85%, including our private business, like our water companies, didn't even have enough insurance to recover. So when you talk about all of that happening at one time, so now you have all these gaps that you're trying to fill. You're going to fill those gaps with a loan, which is going to put you in more debt, but you still have to pay that back. It's like, where's all this money coming from? Then you had the good part about the early on fighting for the community is we were able to like advocate waivers for, all the things that happened when it came to your construction, like getting your plans cleared and all that stuff. We fought for that through the Altadena Native Rebuild Plan. And early on, the whole community put that plan together. So those things, certain things were able to be waived to help. But then again, on the back end of that, then the electric company who burnt us down, who's responsible for everything, which I have not stated in this interview. They burnt us down. I was the first lawsuit against Edison um, International, and they are going to require for you to make the connection of your electricity, which is $20,000 or $30,000. So again, these are all added costs that are coming out of nowhere. Like, oh, so we got to pay 20, 30,000 to connect, and you're not paying for it. We have to pay that as homeowners on top of all the other costs of rebuild. Um, Construction is very predatory. I just built my house. There are wonderful construction people out there, but as a whole, as a business, it's very predatory and it takes advantage of people already. So then you put a disaster with that, and then you put an elderly population with that who has to fight and navigate that. You're putting stress and pressures on everything when it comes to how we can actually come back and rebuild. So the process is happening. Earlier pieces, putting legislation together and fighting early on, put practices to a streamlining of where we can build back. But financially, it's figuring out what that's going to look like and how you're going to build back.
And I think too, another thing, a point that I want to make is when people hear generational wealth, they just think that everybody's wealthy out there because they may see $1 million home or see something, but the value people need to understand, and want you to help people understand, the value was in the home. It wasn't sitting in the bank account. It wasn't, everybody else wasn't flush with money, because I think that's perception of people across the country, and maybe why it's not, well, they can just rebuild this and that. They got the money. They're millionaires. But can you state the importance of how that was built into the house, and with these houses burned down, like that's all gone away?
No, that's a great point, like amazing point. See, people, when they say you live in an affluent neighborhood, doesn't mean you can afford that affluent neighborhood. Meaning, the wealth, you hit it right on the nose. The wealth that was brought back was because these houses were bought back in the 40s, 50s, 30s. So those houses were bought at $30,000, and the equity jumped as it grew. So then now those taxes, everything were locked in to be able to make it affordable. But people are living check to check because you have to pay the high taxes of California. Across the nation, people understand that, because we look at houses and places everywhere else and go, oh my God, that's all it costs. And then we're looking at our house and they have a 5-bedroom, 3-pool house that's way cheaper than a 3-bedroom, whatever house in the neighborhood we're living in. And we're like, well, you have all these big old luxuries and have all this stuff, and we don't have all of that. We paying for the weather, I guess, and the location, because we check the check, and it costs every dime that you put in, you're losing. So that is the Black community. It's a hardworking community, but it's a hardworking community that every check is going to pay for that. So it's not like the other place that burnt down that I feel bad for, minus like the Palisades. They have a 7% of poverty like that with the mobile homes. I'll give them that. And the few families that went through the same thing, that I call them, they have the same situation as an Altadena family. But that's like the small percentage. Ours is as a whole. Like everybody, no one, ours is the opposite. Maybe 2% were rich or something like that. Everybody else was living check to check with businesses. And I'm talking about even the other ones that weren't Black. I'm talking about, I have Jewish neighbors who, like, I have a whole coffee business, and I'm crying in my arm, like, I don't know if we're gonna be able to build back, because the costs are so high. So the whole community was living, basically check to check as a community, like, meaning it was a good flow. You figured it out, and you could live in a comfortable place where you wanted to be. Not because you were running around with fat pockets and there's money everywhere. So that's the misconception. I'm glad you pointed that. That's a huge misconception, is that this is just another one of those rich neighborhoods, so they'll be okay. And that is far from the truth or the case. It's actually the opposite. It's because your wealth was in your home. Your wealth was in that. That's what you were spending all your money. That's what I meant by we didn't have stocks. People didn't have all these super investments and big 401ks. And our elders was, like I said, stashing money in the walls. So if you did the money that they did have, you talking away black people have that bad to have money on them, you know that's gone. Especially people who didn't think that, we were ever burned down, because we didn't think we would ever burn down. So as a
And
community, yeah.
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, but folks also, and I think that this is one of the things that gets lost in the conversation. I mean, I think so. There's the one point is that people also were living in multi-generational homes, right? So that you had grandmothers, their kids, grandkids, right? Like the wealth that was in the house was created a home for 2-3 generations. And so that's sort of also, I think, a thing that people don't totally understand. But people also, I think, what has gotten lost in some of this is that people also lost businesses, right? So
Yes.
businesses were lost. You may have owned a home in Altadena, and you were also a small business owner in Altadena. And some people lost both things, their homes and their businesses. I think that's part of the story that doesn't often get told as well.
And you hit again, Adrian, right on cue. My business, Extreme Athletics, was a full business in Altadena. And when you lose your home, you lose your neighbors, all your people, and you lose your business, you lose it all at one time. And then the recovery of that is absolutely insane, and it's unfathomable, because you don't even understand how to process that or how to move forward, because you don't even have a neighborhood to go back to where your business stood. So where all your clientele is, they're all gone and dispersed now. So how do you even get your business back going when there's no neighborhood for your business to thrive at the moment? So that you hit that right on the head. And when you said about the generational part, it's the same thing. My cousin who lives 2 houses down from me, same thing. His grandmother, that was Grandma Tiny's home. You know what I mean? She kept the whole neighborhood together and fed the neighborhood and all like that. 2 houses down, and then when she passed, um, Auntie Don, she took over and carried the torch and carried the family to make sure that the house stayed in the family. And she worked every day tirelessly. She worked for the courthouse. I want to give her flowers while I'm speaking. She worked for the courthouse for years consistently. She was the next person to consistently just work and pay and make sure that home still existed for the family. And it's millions of stories like that. And now the kids of the elders are the ones who run around fighting to save these homes for the elders a lot of times, if those elders aren't by themselves. And those kids are tired too, because you got to realize those kids are right behind that in their 60s, 50s, and 40s. And some are younger in 30s and stuff like that, but they're fighting and run around to take care of the elders and everything that's going on in this business to keep this generational wealth. And they're having all kind of health issues. That's the other part we don't talk about a lot of too. We talk about the 19 who died initially. We don't talk about the 400 who have passed afterwards because of the stress and the
Yeah.
toll. We've had 400 plus people who've died. We haven't talked about the people who've committed suicide because of this. This is painful. Because of the stress in the community of what it's like to lose everything, and fathers feeling like they failed their family now because they can't keep them housed, because we've had to move 15 times, and you're trying to stabilize your family and doing all those different type of things, and mothers who, like I said, just the stress of all of it. You wouldn't wish this on your worst enemy. So it's people can't relate. So this is why this story is so important, because you will not be able to understand. I've met with fire victims from all over, meaning I've been with the mayor from Lahaina, the Woolsey Bobcat. I've met with every fire group victim that I possibly could, to make sure that we had the proper information for rebuild, and that pain. One of the sentiments was, people won't understand unless you really get them to listen, and the humanity side of how much we've actually lost when you lose everything. This year, does not feel like there is no recovery time, like where we're feeling good, like, oh, it's been a year, people finally starting to build back. We won't recover until our community is fully back. Then we have to deal with the mental health of everything we lost. I haven't processed any of the death. I just moved. We're talking about a year later. I just got my sister's car registered. I haven't moved it. I haven't touched it. It's so many pains that people push to the side and advocate for everything else where they're not taking care of self at all. So the mental health side of all of this is why we need so much help. This is why this awareness needs to be put out there, is because people don't tell these stories while they're happening. You hear about this 10 years later when they want to talk about it. But we need to talk about it now so we can make a change so other communities don't go through this.
Yeah. Well, man, well, like I said, we thank you, and we're definitely going to shine awareness with this project, with this documentary, and continue the mission. We want to continue this journey with you, throughout, highlight, bring attention to this story, bring attention to the community. So, again, thank you. And with the documentary, it's going to release on Wednesday, March 4th. So on the Ville Media YouTube page. So we'll continue to highlight, continue to bring awareness, and continue to have you on so we can continue this conversation.
No, I appreciate that. And before we go, there's one other part that I did forget. The part that I had to early on when I partnered with UCLA and all of that, and with the coalitions in Altadena that have been fighting, that I will definitely name in these podcasts to make sure that they're seen, because they're fighting on the ground. But that's for the remediation and all of the toxins and the poisons that we haven't talked about when it comes to all the standing homes and then the ones who lost, and making sure that we get that out and make sure that we get all of the programs aligned and making sure that it's safe for your kids to be back with all the lead and all the stuff, the toxic stuff that happens that burn down. So I didn't want to forget that point, that you got to understand these are what people are facing. I have an autistic family who has 3 autistic sons, and her fear is that they're in their home. Their home is still standing, and it's been a year, and they're not back in it, but they're worried because of the toxins. And they get sick every time they go back and visit. And they're like, well, we got to make sure an insurance company goes back to insurance. The insurance companies aren't giving them the check. So she's like, well, I can't do anything because I have to wait on them to pay me. And they're not willing to pay me. And I've been covering these costs, which is bankrupting her and putting her in financial credit stuff to carry her whole family until this happens back. So I didn't want to miss that part about the remediation and how important the environmental side of all of this is also.
And while you're saying that, I want to touch, I know you're developing a fund right now that people can be on the lookout for coming soon, where they can help and provide resources. What's the name of the fund? And we'll make sure we continue to highlight that.
Yes, that's going to be the Altadena Native Rebuild Fund, and that will be, so it goes directly back to the community. It's literally, this is a pass-through to make sure that this is where we're held up and taken care of, and to make sure that we could to get back. So that fund will help that process in the waiting period that we need, so we could actually rebuild, because we'll need that also for the rebuild also.
Right. Okay.
Well, Zaire, thank you for coming on, both to tell the story. I see you in different, giving interviews everywhere, in the meetings, giving testimony up in Sacramento, in all the places. And so I know that it's been an exhausting year for you and your family. And so we appreciate you coming on and keeping this out there, because I do think that we just have to remind people. I don't think it's that I don't think people have forgotten, or they don't want to be bothered, or they don't want to pay attention. I just think that it's easy, given the world that we're living in right now, right, for folks to be like, I got this other problem. So I'm just glad that we were able to put this short film out to make sure that this stays on people's radar, and then also to be able to lift up the places where people can continue to help, right, and to give donations and to be able to support the rebuilding process of Altadena. So thank you again.
And I'm always thankful for the platforms of the people who care and show a heart, because that matters. So being able to partner, and this is going to be the difference of us equitably building as people and as communities, if we ever want to survive with everything else that's going on. Because it is rough in the political system. You do get distracted and pulled all over the place with all of this, for your own foundation. So if we don't pull together now, we're not going to have a future, and we have to be aware of that at this point, especially as Black communities. That if we don't put this back together and we don't come together at this point in time in history, they're trying to wipe out our history. They're trying to take away our voice. They're literally systematically, whoever they are, is trying to
I think
do
we
that.
know who they are.
Yeah, whoever they
They're
are.
clear about that.
Yeah, but that's what's terrifying. So that's why this is more important, of why how we show we come together to empower each other to take care of each other, because we finally have the knowledge and the ability, and financially, and all the different steps we have as a people together, we can actually do that for once, as a community. So we need to show that and start supporting each other. So then, the future of this is the same way we're showing support. I want to start the coalition to be able to be like, give back to the next. Hopefully there's not a next disaster, but it's the same thing. So now this becomes a passing of, as we always said, the black dollar, and keeping it in the community, and then having all the dollars, not just the black dollar. We need the white dollar, the Asian dollar, but to pass through our community. And that's the difference of the voice that we haven't said. We need the Jewish dollar. We need every dollar to pass through our community and stay in our community for the same time period, to build, for everyone to be a part of.
Awesome. Well, Zaire, again, brother, thank you for joining us and sharing your story, your testimony. Adrien, thank you for creating a platform where we can build these stories and highlight these stories.
Thank you.
You'll be able to check out the documentary Rebuilding Altadena on the Ville Media YouTube page. Like and subscribe to the YouTube page. And again, we'll continue this journey, continue this story. We'll be right there with you, Zaire. Thank you for tuning into the group chat. Catch you next time.